Hello and welcome to Back to Basics. Back to Basics is a series of videos in which I revisit the most iconic innovations from Veeam, the technological innovations, and I go over the fundamentals that have contributed to the company's success for over 15 years now. Today we are going to talk about one of these technological innovations. It is an innovation that has completely transformed the traditional approach to restoration for businesses, allowing them to reduce recovery times from several hours or even several days to just a few minutes, thereby drastically decreasing application downtime. Today, in this video, I am going to talk to you about the instant recovery of PostgreSQL databases. Let's get started. So, to clearly illustrate all of this, I suggest we start with a whiteboard in order to understand the mechanisms, processes, and different steps involved when we thoroughly trigger this type of instant recovery. And for that, we have a very simple environment here. We have a PostgreSQL server here. On this PostgreSQL server, there is a PostgreSQL instance that is attached and a database that is attached to this PostgreSQL instance. We have a user here who is working on the database, who is connected to the database, and we will represent this user. We will represent their connection to the database here with the blue dashed lines. So this PostgreSQL server is backed up here in a repository, Veeam repository, in which all the backup files, backup archives, and backups of this PostgreSQL server are stored. So, in the event of loss or unavailability of this SQL instance, there are several possible restoration scenarios. The goal here is to restore as quickly as possible, or at least to bring the instance and the database back online as fast as possible. And the technology and feature that will enable this is instance recovery. So, the instant recovery, like all other forms of instant recovery, physical machines, virtual machines, databases, and NAS, is the result of an inversion of the traditional restoration process. The traditional process begins with the extraction and migration of data from the backup to the initial target infrastructure, production, and then, in the second step, we start. But the problem with this traditional process is that the duration of the extraction is variable. It can take several hours, and this duration for extracting migration copies is a process, an operation that is very time-consuming and can take a long time, impacting the application's time to return to service. So the idea of instant recovery is to reverse the process. We start by launching the workload. We start the VM, the physical machine. We start the database, the instance, or the NAS directly from the backup. So we will publish or mount the workload directly on the server from the files that are stored in the repository. And then the second step will involve moving the data, performing the extraction, migration, and transferring the backup to the production storage. We will do it in the background without interruption or with minimal downtime and unavailability. So, how does all this materialize? I want to restore and perform an instance recovery of my PostgreSQL instance. The first step is, here, we will represent all of that. This is essentially the startup process from the backup, like this one here. Next, the first step here is the step that we will call publication, which is a crucial step in this process and for our project, as it involves several important tasks and considerations. Here we will have an instance that is started here, and in this example we will call it that we have, and then it will be okay. So this is just the first step. We are basically going to publish this instance. We will essentially publish it. So we will bring the instance back online. So obviously, after the unavailability of the initial instance, access is cut off, and this user will be connected to that instance. The instance, of course, is linked to the PostgreSQL server. Next, what will happen is that this user will continue to work on the instance and the database, generating data and modifying a number of pieces of information in the database, and all these modifications will be stored here. represented in the write cache, referred to as write cache here. So all the modification delta will be stored in the cache here in write. Next, the second step. The second step is a very crucial step of, we will represent it here in more detail. We are going to have here, therefore step 2, we will essentially call this step a copy and replication step. Files from the instance of the repo to the PostgreSQL server, we will copy and set up the necessary replication here, so we will obtain an important result. No, it's not that one. We are going to obtain another instance here that we will call, for now, standby instance. So, this is the second step in our process. This step is crucial for ensuring everything works correctly, copying and replicating the repository to the server to have a copy, in fact another copy, a replica of the published instance. We will have a replica of its instance here, which is a standby instance. Then, when we get there, we have just completed the first step of the process. This is the publishing step, and it allows, in just a few minutes, to make this SQL instance available again and to quickly bring the database back into service. Next, in the second step, it is necessary to finalize this restoration. The restoration must be completed in such a way that the instance and databases are executed from files that are locally present on the PostgreSQL server. And so this second step will be broken down into several sub-steps in a detailed manner and thoroughly. The third step here will be, I will represent it here. The third step, I will position it a bit here on the link. What will happen is that the published instance will be switched to read-only mode, currently in the system for maintenance purposes. In read-only mode, so that we can be certain and have the guarantee that no modifications to the instance will definitely be made from that moment on. And once the published instance is in read-only mode, which means no further changes can be made to it, we will proceed to the fourth step in the process, which I will position and explain in detail here. And this fourth step, a synchronization step, okay, is the final synchronization between the two instances. What will happen is that the modification delta here in the write cache will be replicated to the standby instance so that we have a perfect copy of these two instances. And to conclude the fifth step that I will position here is once there is a fourth prime step, which essentially involves actually stopping the published instance. And the fifth step will allow starting the instance that is in standby. And the standby instance will transition from standby to, I will put it here, recover. Switches from standby to restored instance recovery, okay? And from there, obviously the user will, of course, access this restored instance essentially. So if we summarize all of this, let's recap everything we've discussed so far. Let's go over the first step once again. The first step, as we saw earlier, is the publish instance. This is where the initial setup happens. The second step is called the replicate instance. In this step, the data or information is duplicated to ensure consistency and availability. By following these steps, we ensure that the process is smooth and efficient. Remember, the publish instance is crucial for the initial setup, and the replicate instance is essential for maintaining data integrity. Third step, here it is the switch step. Let's say switch, basically, essentially, publish the current instance to the system mode. Fourth step, the fourth step is the final sync. We will call it the final sync. And it is a very important step in the process. We will ensure it is done carefully. It is a Tor9 To complete the process, you need to work with the published instance and follow through with step 5. In step 5, you will need to ensure that all necessary configurations are properly set up. Once you have completed step 5, you can proceed to start the standby instance. This involves initializing the standby instance and making sure it is ready to take over if needed. Here is a detailed breakdown of the steps. First, you need to complete step 3, which involves setting up the initial parameters. Then, you move on to step 5, where you finalize the configurations. Finally, you start the standby instance, ensuring it is fully operational. There you go. The process is now complete. In this section, we will focus on steps 3 to 5, which are considered to be a crucial part of the entire process. These steps are collectively known as the switchover phase. The switchover phase is essential because it marks a significant transition in the process. During this phase, several key activities take place that ensure the smooth progression from one stage to the next. So, what exactly is the role of the switchover? The role of the switchover is to facilitate this transition by coordinating various elements and ensuring that everything is aligned for the subsequent stages. This coordination is vital for the overall success of the process. It is about reducing interruption and downtime, minimizing it to the shortest duration possible, ensuring that the interruption is as brief as possible. And what happens is that Veeam will ensure, before triggering the switchover, that the write cache is less than 100 megabytes in size. Once the write cache has a size of less than 100 megabytes, Veeam will trigger the switchover. So this is the guarantee. It allows the mechanism and the algorithm to ensure that the amount of data to be synchronized finally is below 100 megabytes, so that this interruption is as short and brief as possible. So the switchover is really a crucial step in the process. It is what will ensure a minimum of downtime for the instance and the associated databases. Well, I now suggest we take a look at all of this in a demo in the interface to see how everything is set up and how the Veeam assistance will help trigger and ensure a proper reactivation of the PostgreSQL instance. Let's go. So for the demo, I have here simply a server. So PostgreSQL, an instance that is here. I have two databases, Birthday and Postgre, which are the two associated databases. So for the demo, to illustrate the restoration a bit, I will delete the instance. We are going to completely remove it. There you go. We no longer have any available instances on this server. And so we are now going to trigger the restoration. This server was backed up previously, and in the Veeam interface, I right-click here and select Restore Application Item, PostgreSQL Instance, to launch the granular restoration utility called the Explorer. Explorer for PostgreSQL. So we validate all of this. Browse to launch the Explorer. When we arrive here, I position myself on the Linux instance 54.32. I find the associated databases, and on the instance, I right-click. I also have access here in the ribbon above, but I will stay here in the Instant Recovery context menu. And the first step, the first question that Veeam asks me is, what type of switchover would you like to do, Mr. Administrator? There are three types of switchover. There is an automatic mode that causes Veeam to automatically proceed at the end of the publication and at the end of the publish. If the write cache is below 100 minutes, Veeam will automatically trigger the switchover and perform the final synchronization, switching from the published instance to the standby instance so that it can be restored in the end. The manual mode, as its name suggests, is a mode where you have to trigger the switchover yourself. This is the one we will use to break down the process a bit more and to give you a better understanding of all of this. It is also possible to schedule the switchover for a specific date and time. So what we're going to do is perform a manual switchover to make it perhaps more detailed and easier for you to digest. So we can see here that there is an instance recovery process underway. Therefore, we will select and monitor the progress of the operation. So the first step is basically mounting. Here, Veeam will mount the instance to publish it from the repository. Essentially, the process of preparation for publication. So if I come back here to the whiteboard, we are still at step 1, the publication step. I return to the demo and the publication step is complete. And then step 2 of creating the replica, which is an important step in the process of creating the replica. Creation of a replica, starting the replica instance that we find here on the whiteboard. This is step 2, which allows for the creation of this standby instance at the end of the copy and replication. And so step 1 and step 2 have just been completed on the diagram. We can see it here. And since the current modification rate is very low, it is less than 100 megabytes, Veeam immediately considers that all conditions are met to trigger the switchover. And since we have chosen manual mode, it is up to us, the administrators, to trigger the switchover. But I am not going to trigger it right away, because we have an instance that is present and running from the backup. We have not finalized the restoration. However, if we come back here, on the Postgre side, we will see that the instance is fully operational from that moment on. That is to say, as soon as the publication occurs, we obviously have access to the PostgreSQL instance. So for that specific server, we will refer to it as, let's say, recover with instant recovery, which is a method that allows for quick and efficient restoration of data and services in the event of a failure or disruption. Okay, here the server, as you can see, is called Linux and the password, which is important, and we are going to validate all of that in this case. What do we see? We can clearly see that our instance and our databases are available and fully operational. So for now, we have not finalized the restoration. So we are still in this configuration, step 1, step 2. All right? So here, we have an instance that is running directly from the backup. It is already available. We can access it. You see that the databases are rational, and we can access a certain amount of information about this database, about these databases. There you go. I hope you have learned a lot, and that all of this is very clear for you. As you could see in the interface, it is something relatively simple to implement. There is no particular complexity, and you can thus guarantee or ensure a recovery that is as fast as possible with this very interesting feature of instant recovery. That's all for today. Thank you.